Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we humbly bow before Thee at this time to give Thee thanks for the opportunity that we have this evening to meet with those of like precious faith to continue our study of Thy Word. We pray as we do so that Thou will be with each of us. Help us to come to a better understanding of Thy gospel message and things contained therein. We ask for Thy forgiveness of our sins, of our shortcomings, and our many weaknesses. And if it be Thy will, at the return of Thy Son to this earth, to reestablish Thy kingdom, we pray that each of us may receive a place therein. In Christ's name, we humbly approach Thy throne. Amen.
So, as you can see, we're in chapter 9, which is influence over death, and we have a lot of really interesting things to talk about, and we're really only scratching the surface. But like I said, with each one of these chapters, I try to present them as character foils where we're comparing women in similar circumstances and seeing what they did with it. Sometimes they use their influence for good, and sometimes they used it for evil, but they definitely had a lot of power in the situation. So this chapter is dedicated to influence over death, and women have been responsible for pardoning the death of others or causing the death of others. It is quite incredible. So our first reading is from James 3, and it just shows you the power of the tongue regardless whether you're a man or a woman, and it's really quite powerful. So our first reader, I guess, is you, right?
Yeah, we can do that, yes.
James 3 at the bottom.
When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder whenever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue and a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. Considering what the great forest is set up on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of its life on fire, and is itself set fire by hell.
Thank you. Alright, so the point of this is that our influence is really quite powerful, and we're gonna see that this can be used for all kinds of means. One of the ones from history I think that you all probably don't know about, who is Napoleon's wife? Anybody know?
Josephine?
Josephine. So, at one point, Napoleon wanted to get rid of all of his competition, to come back to the crown. There was one member of the royal family from France who lived in Belgium. And he decided he was a threat. So he crossed the border, arrested him at his chateau, and he had made no threat, he'd done nothing to him, and brought him back to France. So then he decided to have him executed, simply because he was a member of the royal family. And Josephine came to him and she's like, "You've done it, haven't you?" She said, "It's shame on you and shame on our family. You've brought shame on our family, and this will end in your own demise." So she, that early in Napoleon's life, told him, "You're done because you've shed innocent blood that you shouldn't have shed." Besides all the blood that he shed in battle. And she was again advised about whether he should go to Russia. And she says, "Do not go." She advised him 100,000 ways, and they weren't even together anymore at that point. And he went in there with like 150,000 men and came back with 10,000 men. So Josephine tried to warn Napoleon. There's lots of good wives who've done their part to save their husbands from destruction. And we're going to see some really amazing stories here. So our first one is Herodias. And can anybody tell me a little bit about Herodias?
Let's see, that's the wife lady.
So Herod had married her, and she was his brother's wife. And there is a soap opera about it all. And even after this incident, Herod and his wife have a very untimely political undoing and then death after this. But she was criticized by John the Baptist, and mainly at Herod, because he had taken his brother's wife and basically had adultery with her. It wasn't that his brother was dead, it was quite the opposite. So she was constantly looking for an opportunity to kill him, but why wouldn't Herod kill him? Does anybody know? Why wouldn't Herod just go ahead and whack John the Baptist for speaking bad about him and his wife?
Because he was scared of him. He was scared that of his, I guess, authority and being a man of God.
That is definitely right, and there's another big reason.
Well, the people loved him so much
Oh yeah,
that to do that would be trouble.
he was scared of him, but he was also, he liked to talk to him, it says that in scripture, and
Yeah.
thirdly, because he would send for him often. And then the third thing is that the people regarded John as a prophet, and he was a little bit intimidated to kill him. So, I guess Walter, you're a reader for this?
Okay, sure. So we're going to talk about Herodias, kill the critic, from Matthew 14, 3-12. Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but was afraid of the people because they considered him a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for them and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." Well, the king was distressed, but because of his oath and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted, and John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus.
So it's an incredible story. He was very fearful of the people, and so he arrested him, but he wouldn't kill him. And I'm sure Herodias, his wife, was doing everything she could to try to get him killed because she didn't want the critic around anymore. And of course, Herod made the absolutely horrible mistake of writing a blank check.
Yeah.
You never ever do that. You do not know what is going to happen. And so the girl didn't know what to ask for, so she was consulting her mother, and her mother's like, "Give me the head of John the Baptist." I'm like, so she danced really well, and she's getting the bloody head of a Jew, as a present from the king. I would be like, there's 100 other things I can think of.
For real?
A horse, a palace, a nice carriage, ballroom
Jewelry.
gown, jewelry. There's like
Dresses.
a lot of things you could ask for. So my question is how persuasive must have Herodias to be to get her daughter to ask for the head of a man on a plate? And you got to think about this too. These are dinner guests at a birthday party. What are you gonna think when somebody shows up with a silver platter with somebody's head on it?
Oh.
I mean, wouldn't that, I don't know, I would think this was civilized enough culture where that would have been pretty grotesque to imagine. But my basic question is, what was her influence over death? And how long has it been going on? Just to think about it. Anybody have any ideas?
Forever, really.
Since she's been criticized by John the Baptist, of course, and what it was is that she couldn't get to John the Baptist because he was in prison and under the authority of Herod. And so John the Baptist was in limbo land. He couldn't be freed and he couldn't die unless something really amazing happened. So all this came about, and the first person, the next of kin that was told, which is really interesting, is that they immediately go and tell Jesus, his first cousin, what had happened. And John the Baptist was sent to be the precursor to his 3.5-year ministry, to tell everyone that he was coming. And he wasn't killed by the Pharisees, he wasn't killed by the Sadducees. What's odd is that he's killed by Herod here. So it's an interesting story. But anyway, it's also recorded in Mark chapter 6, verse 17. Here's our next reader.
Brother David or Sister Nancy, either of you would like to read this, please?
Okay. Mark 6:17. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him.
So that's the part I got from when we were in the other passage, is that Mark tells us he regarded him as a holy man, a righteous man, and he called for him often, and he liked him. But this is what happened to Paul. It's certainly what happened to John the Baptist. The only place for them to keep them alive and keep them safe was prison. It's like, if they're outside, they're going to get killed. If they're inside, they're going to get killed. So the best no man's land to put them in is in prison. And that was all because of Herodias. She would have done anything to have him executed. And this was her opportunity, and it was a back door. And I'm sure that it didn't help their marriage when this was over, because it put him in a very awkward political position. And who is Herodias thinking about during this whole time? Is she thinking about the people? Yes or no?
Not in a positive light.
Is she thinking about her daughter?
No,
Not directly.
No. Is she thinking about her husband?
absolutely not.
Right. Is she thinking about Rome?
No.
There's just, in no way, the only person she's looking out for in her influence over death in this scenario is herself.
Selfishness goes a long way.
It does.
Well, she had a grudge. It says she had a grudge against him, so she was just mad,
Absolutely.
She wanted some kind of revenge on him.
That's why it says, hell hath no fury as a woman scorned.
The thing about revenge, it never ends. It just keeps going and going. Because someone else gets affected by it,
Yeah.
and then the next person gets affected by it. The next person, it's a cycle of death that repeats itself constantly.
Yeah.
Which is sad on everyone's part, because
John the Baptist didn't take any revenge.
Well,
and neither did Christ, but
I was talking about
for her.
the humans and all in this situation.
Yeah.
It's really sad how your anger gets the better of you, and it ruins so many other people's lives.
Absolutely. So there's a lot to be taken away from this, and this one is okay. So I think this must be from Luke or John. I don't know why I don't have the reference up here. It makes me crazy. Must be from Luke. I should have put it in there. I think this one's from Luke. I don't even know what chapter. I apologize. Next reader.
Okay. David, is that big enough on y'all's side, or I get someone else?
Let me give it a try.
Okay, thanks.
Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, "Ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you." And he promised her with an oath, "Whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What shall I ask for?" "The head of John the Baptist," she answered. Once the girl hurried in to the king with the request, "I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb.
Great, thank you so much. So in this version, we learn a little bit more of the information that Herod was so moved by this girl's dance that he was willing to give her up to half of his kingdom. I'm like, she must have had a great choreographer. She must have had a great, stylist and I guess dance gown to go with this. But I'm like, where was his head in all of this? You know, if he did this because he took his brother's wife, what does this incident mean?
I suspect he'd been in the cup a long time and drinking a fair amount to lose that side of things.
Yeah.
I mean, to offer up to half of your kingdom.
Yeah.
His wife would say, "Wait a minute, that's my half."
Yeah.
Right?
There's just a lot to this, and you're
Yeah.
just like, what in the world? I mean, he's a very base man, in every respect, and probably pretty weak-willed, but in this incident, he really lost it all, and it all came unraveled because of this event. I mean, everybody knew about it because John the Baptist was so well known, and he's like trying to honor his dinner guest, and he's being influenced by his evil wife through his stepdaughter, I guess.
Eee. That's terrible.
So, the other question I have that you need to realize is, who is Herodotus's daughter? I believe that her father is Philip, not Herod.
Right.
So there's another little trick here in the story that, she was a stepdaughter to Herod, and her real father was Philip. And you gotta think of the poison that was probably emanating from Herodotus about her father to her daughter and all the rest of it. And this one event at Herod's birthday, to put on this huge performance, I wouldn't doubt that she was the one who orchestrated this and made sure she was doing the right kind of dance for him so that he would be overwhelmed and offer her everything. Just a lot to think about. There's a lot of background to the story, and this girl who danced was not Herod's daughter, it was Philip. So just a lot to think about, a lot to absorb, and I think her influence started way before she asked, "What should I ask for?"
And once again, the ladies were not invited to this banquet. This was a guys only thing.
Yeah.
Ah.
You notice she was outside and her daughter had to go find her.
That's very true.
So we've seen this before and it doesn't usually end well.
Exactly. So in the King James Version, for instructed or prompted in the ESV, the word is provisio, which means to cause to go forward, to lean forward, to bring forward, to drag forward, to incite, investigate, urge, or set on, to induce by persuasion. So she couldn't order the death of John the Baptist. All she could do was influence his death and make it happen. So the Bible does give us those words of influence that this was actually going on. So this is a lot. If nobody wants to read it, I'll be glad to. What was the end of Herodias? Since she was the source of Herod's sin, Herodias became the source of his shame. According to Josephus, Herodias' ambitions was the ruin of Herod. Jealous of the power of Agrippa, her brother, she prodded Herod and demanded of Caligula, the emperor, the title of king. Agrippa saw to it that this demand was refused, and Herod was banished and ended his days in shame and exile. The pride of Herodias forced her to be faithful to her husband in the disgrace and misfortune she herself had caused. And that's here from Lockyer's book, All the Women of the Bible, page 69. So if people don't want to read it, I can read it, so you let me know, Walter. The text in the blue and white.
That is really small, I think.
Okay.
Tell you what, how about I just read it for y'all and we'll have a bigger text, we'll pass that on.
Okay.
According to the Synoptic Gospels, Herod was also tetrarch, or sub-king of Galilee under the Roman Empire, and imprisoned John the Baptist because he reproved Herod for divorcing his wife, Pharisailis, daughter of King Artes of Nabatea, and unlawfully taken Herodias as the wife of his brother Herod Philip I. On Herod's birthday, Herodias' daughter, whom Josephus names as Salome, danced before the king and his guests. Her dancing pleased Herod so much that in his drunkenness he promised to give her anything she desired, up to half of his kingdom. When Salome asked her mother what she should request, she was told to ask for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Although Herod was appalled by the request, he reluctantly agreed and had John executed in a prison. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus also relates in his Antiquities of the Jews that Herod killed John, stating that he did so lest the great influence John had over the people might put it into his, or John's, power and inclination to raise a rebellion, for they seem already to do anything he should advise. So Herod thought it best to put him to death. He further states that many of the Jews believed that the military disaster that fell upon Herod at the hands of Artes, his father-in-law, Pharisailis' follower, was God's punishment for his unrighteous behavior. None of the sources give an exact date, which was probably in the years 28 to 29 AD. After imprisoning John the Baptist in 27 AD, at the behest of Herodias, his brother's wife, whom he took as his mistress, according to Josephus, the death took place at the fortress of Machaerus.
Excellent. Thank you for reading that. So what I love about this is Paul Harvey's, and here's the rest of the story, is that he was banished, she had to bear the shame, and they were exiled and repudiated by everyone, rather than gaining more power. I just can't believe that she basically requested of Caligula, who is not a nice guy, the emperor, to be titled of king, and her brother's Agrippa. I'm like, what? I mean, she was surrounded by power and privilege, and I don't ever know what happened to Philip the First. We don't get a real story on him, but what a disaster in every respect. So I kind of think that she may have orchestrated the dance, so to speak, and she waited until her daughter came back to her and asked for this, but this is Philip's daughter. And she did this for Herod, and obviously, Herodias knew what her new husband liked and wanted, and I think she probably had influence, but that's a little bit of speculation. But I think you can piece some of the parses, the aspects of this together and figure it out. Anyway, does anybody have any thoughts or questions about Herodias?
Herodias was hideous.
Yeah, I like that.
I don't know, messing with Agrippa and Caligula, that is not wise stuff from what we know from history.
Yeah.
But it shows you that she was really ambitious for power.
Too much.
Yeah. So now we're going to switch gears to another wife of a leading Roman family, and this is Claudia Procula, and she was the wife of Pilate. And she did her best to influence him in the right direction, and Pilate didn't listen and didn't get it. So Claudia Procula had a bad dream about Christ. And she woke up and she came and she told Herod, don't have anything to do with this man's death. Nothing at all. Because God has shown me that he is a great man. And so she basically says, don't have anything to do with them. So this print is small, I'll be happy to read it. Archaeology in the 1920s, a lead sarcophagus was discovered in Beirut containing 2 bracelets inscribed with the name Claudia Procula in Greek, respectively. René Mondure dated the find to the 3rd century, possibly near the 3rd century, along with that he noted that some elements appear much more archaic in style. He suggested that it is possible that the author of the Gospel of Nicodemus may have been inspired by the death of this woman whose name Pilate's wife after her, although he notes that there was no evidence for the connection to the Gospel of Nicodemus with Beirut, primarily on the basis of the grave goods found in the sarcophagus, but also taking into account the archaic features noted by Mondare. Jill Cardigan Smith redated the find to the last 3/4 of the 1st century. Smith notes that this is the time period when it is plausible that the woman could have been the wife of Pontius Pilate, though she notes that there is no evidence that Pilate was ever in Beirut. But the name Claudia Procula was attested elsewhere. She concludes that the date of the 3/4 of a century is accepted, that the possibility was that the fact that Pilate's wife, though unlikely, cannot be entirely excluded. So here we are in Matthew, and there's lots of renderings of this moment by artists from around the world. And this is the one from Matthew 27, when he is at the judge's seat. And this is the pivotal moment. It is the fulcrum point at which he has a decision to make of whether to carry on or not. We may think that because of her influence, he made the decision to wash his hands of the whole thing, to get out from under the pressure of it all. So I think Claudia Procula was a brilliant woman for stepping in and stepping out and not being sheepish and waiting. This was very important to get this news to him right away, and maybe it's because Pilate listened to his wife that this whole thing occurred. So we get a reader for Matthew 27, please.
Joanne, is this large enough for you to be able to read? You'll have to unmute yourself. Still not hearing you.
She's still talking.
Yeah, your audio's not working right. Oh well, can't hear you. Yeah. Yep. Nope.
Oh, sorry, Joanna, I don't know why we can't hear you at all.
All right, I'll move on to another reader. You can see if you can figure out what it's doing over there. All right, we'll go down to Patsy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Matthew 27:19. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent to him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called Christ?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility."
So first of all, what is the mistake that both Pilate and Herod made in their communications? They both needed a public affairs agent to stop them, but they didn't have one. What is the absolute similarity between what Pilate did and Herod did? And I said it when we were talking about Herod.
Listening to their wives.
They both listened to their wives.
No. They did.
They deflected the decision to others instead of making it themselves.
That's huge, but they both wrote blank checks.
Oh, that too, yes. But
So Herod wrote a blank check for his adopted daughter.
right.
It said, "Up to half my kingdom, whatever you want." You don't leave that big, huge, wide gap of an opening. The risk, if you had a risk assessment officer, they would say, "You're leaving yourself wide open."
Yeah.
When he asked, "What shall I do with him?" First of all, you don't give the crowd a choice.
No.
What is the mafia gonna do? I mean, the mob gonna do? But pick Barabbas because they're being stirred up. So don't give them that choice. That's writing one blank check. The second blank check, he says, "Well, what do you want me to do with Christ?" You don't ask them that. It's a really stupid question to ask a mob. Well, what do you want me to do with him? Well, what are they gonna say? Any mob's like, lynch him, tar and feather him, kill him,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, like, as a leader, you don't ask these questions.
Right.
It's really stupid. What's funny is that Herod didn't listen to his wife and tried to keep John the Baptist in prison to keep her from her, and she wound up winning out in the end because he was good. He was filled with pride and couldn't give in because of his guest. So she basically checkmated him and got out of him what she wanted. Claudia Procula is smart. She's telling her husband, "Don't have anything to do with this innocent man." And she obviously had a nightmare dreaming about him and what was going to happen. So you see Pilate putting what she said into action. And I think it's smart because he's listening to Claudia Procula, and she is a wise woman, and she's trying to save his career, the history of what was written about Pilate would be written and is still being written constantly. It's been 2,000 years since this incident happened, and she tried to save him. And you can see the influence she had because what does Pilate try to do? Very badly, but he tries to do it.
Wash his hands.
Right. But before that, he thinks he's being smart by saying, "Well, it can be a choice between Barabbas and Christ. Who would you choose?" And I'm like, that was not a smart question to ask them. And then he asked the second dumb question, "Well, what do you want me to do with Christ?" You don't ask them that, it's your job. You're the leader. You don't ask them what you want to do with them.
So it wasn't a very good leader to begin with.
It could have tucked them away. So in the end, I think this is his best effort of trying to listen to his wife by saying, "I'm washing my hands of this whole thing. And I'm innocent of this man's blood, it's your responsibility." He tries to get out from under it, but how has history treated Pilate over the
Not good.
centuries?
Not good at all.
As a weak sycophant, really. Somebody who is, and I think that if you study his history, Pilate got in trouble with Rome for being too harsh on the Jews. So now he's trying to play the middle of the fence, which is never a good way to do it. And he's got to please Rome, and he's got to please the Jews, and that's why he's trying to placate both. But
Well, you brought up one of the most important points from the history here, is that he had so much animosity beginning to build up in Rome that's like, man, I'm in a rock and a hard place. And so he had to keep things on the down low, peaceful and quiet. And now he's gone and stirred up a mob that may riot. Like, oh, I don't need this. I got to do something. What do y'all want to do? Make y'all happy.
I know,
And that's what he does.
appeasement.
Appeasement.
So what did Churchill say about appeasement?
I forget.
Something really good and clever.
Quote about appeasement for Winston Churchill. I want to get it right. An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat him last.
Yeah, he's full enough, maybe he won't.
And that's exactly what's happening here. He's feeding the crocodile hoping that it will eat him last, and it does eat him because he runs out of bait. It's never, you can never appease an enemy or a mob. They're never going to be satiated, ever. So they will turn on him just like they turned on Christ, and it's all going to go downhill. So I would just applaud Claudia Procula because she tried. She stepped in the middle of a very stressful situation, and she tried to give her husband great advice, as opposed to Herodias, who was looking to undermine everything. A wise woman builds her house carefully, and a foolish woman tears it down with her own hands.
Mm-hmm.
So Claudia Procula, wife of Pilate. I want to look at these different versions, if somebody could just read this slide.
All right. Excuse me. We're back to Marjorie.
Oh, sorry.
While he was sitting on the judge's bench, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with this righteous man, for today I have suffered terribly in a dream because of him."
So these are 4 different translations for the exact same verse, but if you don't want to read the rest,
I can.
okay.
While Pilate was sitting in the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message. It said, "Don't have anything to do with that man. He is not guilty. I have suffered great deal in a dream today because of him." And it's alright. I think you get the point.
Yep. So it's interesting, she didn't get to meet with him personally, she sent him a message that was written down to make sure he knew what he needed to do. So it's because of her suffering, she doesn't want him to suffer, which I think is brilliant. She tried everything she could. Now I want to look at these 2 women who definitely had influence over death. And it's Shiphrah and Puah, who were the deceptive midwives in Egypt. Wonderful women, they were rejoiced and praised by God in the end, and blessed themselves with husbands and children. So these 2 women, I got some questions after we read this, but what they did was one of the bravest things I've ever heard of. When you're up against political power that has ordered you to do something, you deliberately disobey, and then you give a cockamamie answer that works. I'm like, woo! These women had guts, so go ahead. Whoever's next.
All right. Nancy, I think we're back to you.
Oh, okay. Exodus 1. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: "Every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live."
So these two women were the stopgap measure for 1.5 million Jews, okay? Because he couldn't get them to do what he wanted them to do, then he gives a postscript that says, okay, since they won't do this, you can kill the boys and let the girls live. So I want you know how this went down among the people. You know, it was just horrible. And I'm sure a lot of babies were hidden, a lot of babies did whatever. But what I laugh about is this answer makes me howl. If you were standing before Pharaoh and your answer was, why did you let the boys live? And the midwives answer, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They're vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. I'm like, then why do you need this job? Because if they're giving birth before you even get there, why do you need to even be tending to Jewish women? This makes no sense at all. But he didn't catch it. I don't know how or why, but her answer, or their two answers, satisfied Pharaoh. And I'm like, anybody with a brain can figure out they're lying, because why would you need a midwife if they're popping these puppies out like a Pets dispenser?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it doesn't make any sense at all. So like Claudia Procula, these women had responsibility of thousands and thousands of lives that happened every day, and they refused to keep the order of Pharaoh, which I just think is extraordinary.
You notice just a little passing thing. You've probably seen it 100 times. In verse 22, and Pharaoh gave this order to his people: every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. He's saying kill all the males. He's saying kill maybe the firstborn, maybe not the firstborn,
Yeah.
but the children of Israel.
Yeah.
And this is God's people.
Yeah.
And so many years later, interesting, he gets to the last plague, and suddenly all of Pharaoh's people, they're the kids that are ones that are now dying as recompense for making statements like this and demanding this of his people.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. He didn't throw him into the Nile because he wanted an Olympic team of swimmers in Egypt. It was because he was trying to make the Jewish people even weaker.
Yes.
By making it just a generation of women.
Right.
And not men. So
Jewish women are pretty strong though.
that's true.
Yeah,
That's the whole point of this entire class, is that they are. Okay, so Shiphrah and Puah had a lot.
perfect.
And Esther is another great example of influence over death. And I want you to consider how serious this whole thing was for her. Because of what happened with Vashti, no one was allowed to just pop in to see the king in his throne room and be seen. He had to lower the scepter in order for them to come in, and that was because of what Vashti did. They put it in the law of the Medes and the Persians that no one could come into the presence of the king, especially female. So she had to go through a lot to arrange this. Now let's just review the facts. Her uncle is Mordecai. Her uncle has been just honored before this banquet dinner by Haman, who despises Mordecai, but the king couldn't sleep the previous night. And what was done for the king because he couldn't sleep? Did they give him a Benadryl or did they do something else?
Yeah, get to read the history books, man.
He says, bring me the history books, it'll put me right to sleep.
For real.
So they brought up the history books and they read about an assassination attempt on the part of his own eunuchs that was foiled by one man. Who foiled the assassination attempt?
Mordecai.
Mordecai. And so he says, what has been done to honor him? Now, meanwhile, Haman had built a 75-foot high scaffold for Haman because he wouldn't bow down and worship him. And he paid well over $1 million in the currency of the time to have dispatches sent to 127 provinces to kill every Jew in every province of the kingdom. That meant it had to go out by courier, it had to go out in every language that was spoken in 127 provinces. And it was a day, the 12th day of Adar, which was when they were supposed to be annihilated. Genocide throughout an entire population. So all this had transpired before this dinner took place. And Esther's first request was to come to dinner. They came and she said, well, he says, the king asked, what is your request? It's just to come to dinner tomorrow night. So at the second dinner now, this is when all this happens. And there's a lot of buildup and there's a ton of situation irony throughout the whole story of Esther. But her influence over death does not stop here, but it does start here. So who's our next reader?
All right, David, we have a nice big font for you.
Okay. Esther, invite thou thine enemy to dinner. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther, and as they were drinking wine on that second day, the king again asked Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. And I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and alienation. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king.
So absolutely the best introduction into this that she could possibly have said. If Michael was in her shoes, she would have said, I can't believe you just did this. I can't believe you let Haman kill my people. You're a bad king, blah, blah, blah. You can put a lot of women in her slot and see what they would have said in this scenario. But she is such a wonderful diplomatist.
Oh, yeah.
She is like Abigail in calming down the situation, in putting everything in beautiful priority. And she's like, if I have found favor with you,
Yeah.
my only request is that you spare my life. And the king would be absolutely shocked by this. He's like,
That's right. What are you talking about?
why is your life in danger? I mean, my blood would be boiling if I heard those words. It's like, what do you mean?
Who's threatened you?
Who's threatened your life?
Yeah, man.
I mean, men have protective instincts. A king has an army of protective instincts.
And he likes her.
And he likes her above all the other women who've come to him. And then she folds it in and she says, and spare my people. This is my request. Her people are his people. So not only has she and the queen been threatened, but his people have been threatened.
Yeah.
Much like a nation is threatened and has to go to war. So she's putting it in terms the king can understand. The royal household has been threatened, and your kingdom has been threatened. And that's what I think is so brilliant about her speech. She says, "For I and my people have been sold for destruction, slaughter, and annihilation." She doesn't choose one word. She goes thesaurus on him and pulls all three out. It's like reading the amplified version. Their homes are going to be destroyed, and everything they own, they're going to be slaughtered, and as a people, they'll be annihilated. That's another way of looking at this, is that it doesn't all say the same thing. And look at the post clause.
Yeah.
She says, if we were merely going to be sold as slaves, I would have said nothing, because that wouldn't have been enough to disturb the king. And you're like, wow, what diplomacy, what withholding of evidence and waiting to the absolute proper moment. The question I have never been able to answer, maybe you guys can figure out, is why there was a second banquet. Why she didn't say it at the first banquet. Why she waited till the second one to do this. But her influence over death is beautiful. It reminds me of the proverb that says, a soft whisper can do what?
Soft answer turneth away wrath.
You know, a soft answer could break a bone.
And that too.
Because I mean, it's just like, she just snaps the bone, and this situation is so beautiful, everybody's like eager to do it on stage, because what does the king do? He goes away in a rage out into the palace gardens, and what does Haman do? He falls at on Esther's couch to beg her to change the edict, because he knows what's going to happen. Hold on. And so the king comes back, and what does he see?
This guy's messing with my wife. What's going on here?
He's laying on her practically,
Yeah.
and he's like, will he molest the queen while I am standing here?
Yeah, that's how low you are, dude.
And Bigtha, who I love, he's one of the guys who just puts back over the guy's head.
Yep.
And he says, by the way, king, Haman has a gallows that he made for Mordecai that's 75 feet hanging at his house. You wanna do anything with that? It's production for use, people.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta have a gallows, you gotta do something with it. And so the king only has to say one word, one phrase. Hang him on it, 4 words. So it's beautifully and exquisitely presented. It's well thought out. She's providing them dinner. And what does the king do again? We so far have seen Herod, Pilate, and Ahasuerus do this. They write a blank check in all 3 instances, and her request is pretty huge, but it needed to be made.
Right.
In theory, maybe she assessed the scene at the first dinner and figured out what she was gonna say and befriended him at first and made sure, well, that was her husband, but it was a strategic planning, I think.
I think it might have been her first real interaction with Haman.
Yeah.
So,
Gotta
Yeah.
figure it out. And notice, I like Vashti. She's actually a cool lady. But notice how she's anti-Vashti here. I'm not going to stand up and be the proud, powerful woman that I know I am.
yeah.
I'm going to chill and say, yo, my husband, my king, my lord, these are the few things I may ask of you, please.
Yeah.
You know, doing all the subservient kind of things. I'm sure she loved that. But it worked. Like you said, her soft answers and soft questions motivated him and moved him, as opposed to making him angry at her, like unfortunately Vashti did in the first place.
Or I was thinking what Michael did to
And Michael, yeah,
oh my gosh.
that was really wrong.
She played her part well.
Well, I just think she's the ultimate diplomatist, and she didn't
Yeah.
need a public affairs agent because she knew what she was doing, and she put everything beautifully.
Well, her agent, of course, was Mordecai.
Yeah, yeah. So let's read the rest of the story. Can I get another reader for this part?
Okay, yeah. I don't know if Joanne's is working or not. You want to try and see if you got the voice back? No, you're totally voiceless. All right, maybe after you reboot it or something, it'll come back. Yeah, can't hear a word. Sorry. All right, so we'll go down to Patsy then.
King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, Who is he? Where is this man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king has already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is within me in this house? While she is with me in this house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then the king said, a gallows 70 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided.
Imagine paying for your own gallows.
Yeah, man.
That's 75 feet high.
Doesn't need to be that high.
You notice, if you've ever noticed those horrible pictures from the Middle East, what things like Hamas and some of those others do, they like to hang people on very high things. Like they get cranes out and they'll lift you up high. It seems to be in their culture that when you have a bad guy and you want everybody to see him up there, this is what happens to you bad people.
Yeah.
And so here's the same thing.
We're
Absolutely.
basically being put on display. Don't cross me.
Yes. It's pretty obvious Haman was not liked by many of the people around him. Because hope on him, man. He jumped right to it like, hey.
I know. It's like Harbona is like on it. Like he doesn't even.
Flinch.
The king doesn't even really have to do anything.
Nope.
And it's over before it even gets started.
Yep.
So I just want to again say Esther's influence over death is tremendous, but it doesn't end here because she's the one who has the influence over Ahasuerus to have all 10 of his sons killed, for his house to go to Mordecai, and she, together with Mordecai, write the new edict that comes from the king to 127 provinces to reverse the curse of what Haman did and undo it. And I think they did it the day before to ensure that they could annihilate their enemies before their enemies could annihilate them.
Wow.
Right. Basically, they had permission to fight back. And so and when a citizen hears that, like, wait a minute, the king says it's okay for them to kill me. If I try to kill them, wait a minute, something's up.
Absolutely. Oh, we're at time? Oh, we are. It's way past. Oh my gosh. How did that happen?
It was a good class, what do you say?
Okay. Well, we'll stop there and pick up with this tomorrow. Next week. So we'll see you on the 19th. I'm thinking the 26th. A lot of people might